Okay, so this is, what's the song? Brain Damage from Pink Floyd. And I'm going to use this to introduce Turin Bar and his mental damage, at least my interpretation of it. So let's see if I can get this thing to work. Okay. Is on the grass. Lunatic is on the grass. Remembering games and days of chains and laughs. Got to keep the loonies on the path. The lunatic is in the hall. The lunatics are in my home. The paper holds their folded faces to the floor, and every day the paper boy brings more. And if the dam breaks open many years too soon, and then there's no room upon the hill, and if your head explodes with dark forebodings too, I'll see you on the dark side of the moon. The lunatic is in my head. The lunatic is in my head. You raise the blade, you make the change, you rearrange me till I'm sane. You lock the door and throw away the key. There's someone in my head, but it's not me. And if the cloud bursts, thunder in your ear, you shout and no one seems to hear. And if the band you're in starts playing different tunes, I'll see you on the dark side of the moon. And all that you touch, and all that you see, all that you taste, all you feel, and all that you love, and all that you hate, all that you distrust, all you save, and all that you give, and all that you deal, all that you buy, beg, borrow, or steal, and all you create, and all you destroy, all that you do, all you say, all that you eat, and everyone you meet, all that you slight, and everyone you fight, and all that is now, and all that is gone, all that's to come, and everything under the sun is in tune, but the sun is eclipsed by the moon. And it's the dark side of the moon. Let's share the screen. And I think this will work. And so you have various ideas here, including the lunatic himself, and the lunatics in the hall. The paper holds their folded faces to the floor, and every day the paper boy brings more. and so we have the story here of a man with apparently either brain damage or mental illness or genius. He's able to see things that others aren't able to see. And if your head explodes with dark forebodings, if the dam breaks open many years too soon, like if I guess a meaning sort of comes through, and your head explodes, and so I'll see you where? I'll see you on the dark side of the moon, the place that's impossible to access. It's like you can't see your back. You can't really see yourself because you are you. And so it's that invisible, inaccessible, unconscious part of ourselves that he's talking about here. You get the lunatic. You're trying to rearrange me till I'm sane, but it's not working. And if the cloud bursts thunder in your ear, you shout and no one seems to hear. And if the band you're in starts playing different tunes, so you're able to kind of, if you're creative, if you're able to make new music, I'll see you in that invisible place or that inaccessible place, in that place that you can't get to. And then this is long, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but all these things you want to do, all the things you slight, all the things you fight, all that is now, all that's to come, everything under the sun, but the sun is eclipsed by the moon. And so okay, I'm trying to get over here. So yes, we're going to try and go through some of these ideas, and Tolkien and Turin bar. I'm trying a new setup here. Let's see if this works. And so I started with this song. It's not really the most appropriate song for this, but I just like it a lot. And we are dealing with Turin at the limits. So it is appropriate in this sense. He's the limit case of meaning, where his narrative, his story, it butts up against a really meaningless limit. And many times blows come in, bad things happen, which push him to the limit of insanity, or of just not finding any meaning, of nihilism. Where there's, when he's young, there's the death of his sister, then his father goes off to war and he becomes a prisoner under the satanic figure of Morgoth, and his people are conquered, and he kills his friend by accident, and he becomes an outlaw, and he goes to an elvish kingdom, and they all are conquered by his fault too, and then he accidentally marries his sister and impregnates her, and then she commits suicide, and then he commits suicide, and you're thinking, holy cow, this is like a just totally unbroken string of totally horrific events that it's like Job on steroids. Like, it's just really, really bad. And discord and disunity are breaking in and are threatening to break in constantly. And yet I'm going to argue, as others have argued, that in the end his story has meaning, and he is a hero. And Tolkien mysteriously makes him a very, very important figure in his whole legendarium. Okay, let's start with Descartes' error. And there's a lot to be said about this, but Descartes, 1600s, French philosopher, methodical doubt, doubts everything, and he's trying to figure out, like, I need a groundwork, I need a foundation to kind of build my philosophy on. And so I'm going to doubt everything until I get to that foundation. And that foundation is going to be like clear and distinct ideas. I think, therefore I am. These things seem to be totally clear and distinct, so therefore it's really solid. Unlike all the other philosophers before me. Nope, it didn't work. Like, it just, and I'm going to make the argument that his route has sent much of modern philosophy down a blind alley, down a wrong path. And I'm going to argue in favor of what's called anti-foundationalism. And I think I have this here where I can share my screen. And is it this one? Let's see if I got this right. Okay, something happened. Let's try that again. Maybe what I can do is put this here and then share this screen. And here we have from the Columbia Dictionary of Modern Literature a definition. And it's good. Anti-foundationalism does not believe that there is some fundamental belief or principle which is the basic ground or foundation of inquiry and knowledge. That's what Descartes was trying to do. That's what so many philosophers have been trying to do. That's what's essentially not possible to do. We're in a languaged world. We're in a world where there's a kind of constant play of language and words and meanings without a kind of solid foundation. Is this a good analogy? Is it like the dollar, which is not grounded in any actual gold anymore? It's just a floating signifier, but it has real value. It still has action in the world. It still can, millionaires can buy mansions and yachts and everything. It's real. And so I think that's where I'm going with this. The opposite of it would be a coherence theory of justification, of foundation, that there's no actual foundation, like no solid ground of clear and distinct ideas. There's just the coherence of the whole, the coherence of the whole dollar market in the world, to keep that analogy. So coherentism, in this definition from the Oxford Dictionary of Philosophy, is the view that a body of propositions may be known without a foundation in certainty, but by their interlocking strength, rather like a crossword puzzle, may be known to have been solved correctly. So you have all the interlocking words in the crossword puzzle, and each individual one you can't totally verify, but the whole thing holds together, and you see, oh, this is the solution. We have solved it. And so this is what I'm going for. This is the meaning that we're going to try and go for in my analysis of Turin here, and in kind of developing these ideas of philosophy and psychology. And I'm going to contrast this with a philosopher who I've listened to named Nolan Gertz, philosopher at the University of Twente, Twente, which is in the Netherlands. And he asks, can language be a guide to reality, or is language a block to reality? And he ultimately says, the language can't get us there. You just do whatever works. You just kind of, you don't really care what's real or what's not real. Who cares? Just do what works. And there's a certain truthiness to what he's saying. I agree in like 25% of what he's saying, but I think he's ultimately wrong, because I'm going to argue that we do get to reality, that language is our contact with reality. Um, it's not a simple correspondence of one to one, like my thought and there's the thing. It's not that simple. Language is, as we were saying, kind of this interlocking body of material which goes through me, but also goes through the last year, the last 100 years. I mean, it's all of thought. Um, the philosophical tradition is embedded in the words that I'm using to describe the world, plus my conversations with other people. It's all there, and that is how I'm able to touch what's real. Um, and right, words, language does distort. It can kind of formulate the world in its own image. It can kind of like lie, and sometimes it does. But the fact that it can lie, I think, implies that it can also tell the truth. Um, Otherwise, if everything's a lie, well, then we're just wasting our time, of course. Um, and so, how do we weave together reality, these things, these qualities, these actions? Gertz kind of says we're just stuck in a hermeneutic circle. Let me say that again. Hermeneutic circle. That our words are just based on another word and another word, and like, and it's just a circular thing. And I'm agreeing, as I said before, that there's this network of ideas and concepts and logoi that hang together, but that does give us access to the world. And then we can really communicate with other people. Otherwise, what's the point? And obviously, I think there's a point to it, but I also think that I'm communicating with you, and that people can communicate with me, that it's real. Gertz would say this. He would say you can't provide any interpretation without itself being in need of an interpretation. And so there's this infinite regress. But I don't see that as a problem. I think that doesn't take away the progress or the insight or the knowledge, the contact with reality that I'm adducing. And let's see if I can reference this in my drawing board here. I've got different moving parts here, so let me see if I can pull this together. Here's my drawing board, where I'm going to talk about something that I've talked about before. I've gotten this from a guy named Ian McGilchrist, and who's a neurologist but also a humanist, where I want to reject the two extremes of thinking about how I know things. One extreme is the rot, and the other extreme is MUMBO, like mumbo jumbo. And this is his great acronym. And ROT stands for the reality out there, as if there's just a simple reality out there and I just got to access it and there's a simple correspondence. I don't think that works, and I think like Gert, I think that doesn't work. But I also disagree with the mumbo part, the mumbo jumbo part, and mumbo stands for made up mysteriously by ourselves. That it's just a big poem that I'm making up, that my language is projecting onto the screen of the world, but I'm never actually getting the world. I'm just making it all up, and that doesn't work either. No, there's a third alternative, which is that a consciousness touches reality, like objects, events, through language and my thought in the context of language. well, consciousness and thought are the same thing, I guess. So this is what I'm going to do. And this is similar to what Plato said. I guess I can stop this for a second. Because what did Plato say? Is this in the Phaedrus? And Socrates is talking to Phaedrus about what you can know and what language can do, the logos. And Socrates gets into an argument, if I'm remembering correctly, and I might be getting this a little bit wrong, that the logos, the logoi, the words, the language don't get us to reality because it's always off. It never totally captures reality. And he makes the argument, if I was to try to express this reality in front of me in words, like right now I could like write a paragraph about it describing all things, but to really describe the thing completely, it would take me infinite time. And the only people who can accurately describe the world are gods because they live forever. So he thinks that humans, our language is so imperfect that like it's always going to mess up. It's always going to like misrepresent what the world is. And Plato's brilliant in sort of making this point. And there's certainly a truth in the fact that, yeah, my language can never totally capture this event or this reality in front of me. But that doesn't mean we can't still get to it, because we have, as I was saying before, not just me, not just today, but I'm using the language from Plato from 2,500 years ago, and from Aquinas, and from Nietzsche, and from Alistair McIntyre. And those languages, those logoi, those words and those ideas are a tradition that is this interlocking set of ideas which strengthen it and give it solidity, even though it doesn't have a grounding in the sense of like a bunch of like rocks underneath it. It's kind of floating there because language works that way, but it's real. It's a real communication of reality. And it's true, like sometimes you can communicate and you can mishear something, and like I was looking up like what would be an example of mishearing something. And what if you go to a restaurant and the waiter says, like today I went to this place called El Rey, Taqueria El Rey, and then what if the person said, would you like a super salad? And I would say, yeah, I'll take the super salad. No, I said, would you like a soup or a salad? Oh, I misheard you. So sometimes we do like mishear, and that's true. So sometimes there's just like literally mishearing something. Okay, that's obviously, that happens. But then you just have a conversation and then clarify. But even if you understand each word in the whole sentence correctly, there's still different interpretations of a sentence. And so that is true. And so that's why we need study and conversation and philosophical work and artistic work in order to get us further and further along. So that's what we're trying to do. And this is going to contrast with some concepts like AI, artificial intelligence, or now there's generative artificial intelligence, and there's different concepts of artificial intelligence, but just sticking with it generally, you have the concept of a machine thinking, and that's pretty much parallel to what the human's doing. And there's a certain sense where that's totally true. And it's computing, and it's getting data, and it's analyzing, and it's number crunching, and it can put out good information. That's AI. In fact, some people would say, and I'm going to disagree with this, that the AI is better than the human because it doesn't have the emotional baggage and the biases and like race and gender and class that would kind of bias the human thought. And I'm going to completely disagree with that because I'm going to argue that human knowledge does include the emotion and the dopamine and the serotonin and the bonding between humans and the trusting between humans and the desiring between humans that make actual human thought, which is real thought, real knowledge, possible. And so, and I've made this argument before, but I'm doing it again. And so we humans have cognitive thought and we have embodied cognition where I'm thinking with my body and with my ears and my gut and my hands, and I'm kind of like figuring something out, like let's say as an artist with the clay, or as an artist or as a auto mechanic with the engine. I'm like, sometimes when I'm thinking with my hands, or as a musician, like playing the guitar, like I was earlier. Where am I going with this? Yeah, so we do have bodily knowledge, and I think I jumped ahead in my outline. So let me get back and say this, that the world, here's the world, there's me, there's the world. I mean, I'm part of the world too, so like the world's here too. Is it kind of just dead stuff that I impose meaning on by my language, as Gertz would sort of say? Sorry to put words in your mouth, Gertz, but I think that's what you would say. No, the world and meaning and consciousness are always coexisting. And the consciousness can cull out the meaning from the world, that a meaning that's there, and it's partly subjective and it's partly objective, because it does depend on, like, where am I standing, what is my class, what are my needs, am I hungry right now? Like, yeah, the way I interact with the world is impacted by these emotions, desires, serotonin, dopamine, and so forth. And that doesn't detract from the fact that it's real knowledge. And in fact, it's only really because of those things that I can get real knowledge. Okay. And I'm going to argue, yes, that there's meaning in the world, there's meaning in these events that I'm traversing, that I must engage in a languaged, I don't know if that's the right word, storied, like the stories in me, and I'm using the story to make sense of the world, to sense make, in order to make that meaning emerge and become visible. And this is going to contrast with a materialist, a physicalist conception of the world. And if I'm going to argue that materialist, physicalist idea that the only real things are the material things, and any kind of idea or consciousness is just a myth, that if I just stick to that way of thinking, I'm cutting off part of my brain, I'm cutting off part of my capacity to think. I'm actually becoming less rational. So I'm arguing for embodied, embedded cognition. Embodied, embedded cognition. Embodied because, as I was saying, I'm thinking with my body, I'm thinking as a human being with a limited body that's mortal, that's going to die. All that stuff helps me think. And embedded, I'm embedded in a project, in a task. I need to build a house, I need to get food, I need to find a mate. Like, these things are allowing me to think and enabling me to make sense of the world, to find meaning, and so forth, and find out what's relevant. Okay, I want to go back to the drawing board again here. And point out a false thing in some of these opponents of mine. I'm always like making my opponents look dumb. I'm sorry. They're at least they're not dumb. They're very intelligent, but I think they're wrong in this sense, where they will tend to say there's two steps. Step one and step two. Not surprisingly, but what are these two steps in knowing something? And this is, I'm going to say this is a false conception, is to say first I identify an event or some object, a tree, a table, and then I impose a story on it to make sense of it and find meaning. Completely wrong. It's all one step. You can't even identify an event until you've got the story. You can't even see an object, I'm arguing, with Merleau-Ponty, with some of these phenomenologists, until I've got my story, until I've got my capacity to make meaning, that these things all happen at the same time. And we can conceptually distinguish between them, but we can't temporally distinguish between them. And so I'm going to give a kind of counter argument to this, which I'm going to draw from this fellow named Martin Buber, a Jewish philosopher, theologian, lived in the 20th century, knew people like Franz Kafka, Rosenzweig, what was the guy's name? All these Jewish intellectuals. And he wrote a book called Ich und Du. And I like to say things in German because I can show off that I know a little bit of German. Ich und du, I and thou, I and you. And he said this. He said, all real living is meeting. What does he mean by this? He means in order for me to really live, which means also to know. Let's put that in there. I'm adding that, but I think that's what he's implying, is meeting, which means having a conversation, conversing, being with another person and relating to them. It's being in relation. This is how I know anything, how I live. And that he distinguishes between the I-thou relationship and the I-it relationship, which is like me looking at an object. But when I'm looking at a you, I'm looking at person, a human being. That's me in relationship. And that human life finds meaning through relationships. So where does meaning come from? It's through me relating to others. And so this is part of this embodied, embedded cognition as well. And part of what I want to argue here against other critics, some other critics, who want to say this, they want to say that for me to humanly express myself, expressivism, whether that's like an artist or a musician or the painter Salvador Dali or André Breton and their surrealism, they wanted to have no limits, no rules, nothing external, just pure me, just you be you. And they thought that's the best way to make art. And that's the best way to express yourself. I think he's completely wrong. I think the opposite is the case. The limit makes you free. And with Stravinsky, Igor Stravinsky, the Russian musician, who was a beautiful musician, but really wild and super creative, almost all the off the charts kind of wildness. I would recommend listening to The Rites of Spring. He made the argument that the more art is controlled, limited, worked over, the more it is free. So for him, art has to be controlled, limited, worked over. Let's put these here for now. That is how art becomes the most free. And it's because of these limits, and like as a poet, if you're a poet, you follow sometimes a verse form, a rule, or a rhyme scheme, a rule that limits you, and yet that's how you get creative. And so this is the idea here that even though language is limiting you, it is what's allowing you to be creative and to express what's really there and to really kind of know yourself. Is that where I want to go with this? Well, let me withdraw that last statement. I'm not sure I want to go there. Let's just stick with the simple idea of the anti-foundationalism idea and language. Language is this network of logoi, words, languages, sentences through time that interlock and become solid, not because there's a groundwork underneath it, not because there's like a foundation of stone underneath it. There's nothing underneath it in a sense. There's just the language. But that still gives us access, a solid access, a changing access, not that it's and a partly subjective access, but a real one nonetheless to the world, to reality. And so, yeah. And then when we get to the narrative of Turin Bar, it is, his life is kind of embedded in this meaning, but it breaks down. And sometimes it breaks down to the point of almost total insanity, where, and next time we'll get into more of the actual quotes from the text, but just to kind of summarize, because I don't want to go too much longer here, that Turin, as we were saying earlier, has all these horrible things happen to him. He kills his friends, he marries and impregnates his sister by accident through the machinations of his enemy, and then he finds it out, and she finds it out, and she commits suicide, and then he gets his sword out, and his sword actually is a talking sword, and he asks the sword to kill him, and the sword kills him. And you think, oh my gosh, this is just like total nihilism. This is Tolkien going off the deep end. But no, there was still a true love there, even between he and his sister. And we'll look at this next time. Like, so how is there a meaning in this most meaningless of all stories of all time? How does Tolkien pull this off? If he does, stay tuned. I'm going to argue that he does. I'm hopefully going to convince you how powerful and how important this story is for that purpose.